Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Saturday. Thank you for being here. I think you're going to love tonight's show. We have two great guests, Michael Duran. We're going to talk about Iran, and David Mamet, this terrific playwright, filmmaker, and he's going to talk to us about the disenlightenment that's taking place in America. So I know you're going to enjoy those guests. But before we get there, you want to have some fun? You want to talk about tariffs? Oh, Mark, come on. When I talk about tariffs, I'm talking about really the Constitution in your republic. That's what we're talking about. Here's our friends at the Washington Times. Rulings add more uncertainty to trade. That's for sure. Here's the New York Post. Terrifying. Yes, indeed. In the Washington Compost, a.k.a. the Washington Post, Trump trade gambit hobbled by setbacks. And I read all these great articles, and they're missing something very important. Your Constitution. Who gets to decide these issues? The courts get to decide everything? Is that the way it works? All right, stick with me. This is very, very important. Here we have from CNN, April 2nd. Congress. 4 Senate Republicans joined with Democrats to rebuke Trump tariff policy in key vote. Senate adopted a resolution by a vote of 51-48 aimed at blocking the Trump administration's proposed tariffs on Canadian imports. The 4 Republicans who voted with Democrats were Rand Paul, as well as Susan Collins, Mitch McConnell, and Lisa Murkowski, all predictable. The impact of the Senate vote may remain largely symbolic. House GOP leaders are not expected to take up any efforts to rebuke Trump over tariff policy, and even moved earlier this year to prohibit such a move. Here's another one, April 30th, so about 4 weeks later. This is from Newsweek. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul spoke out about a bill he co-sponsored. So he co-sponsored a bill to prevent President Donald Trump from using emergency powers to implement his tariff agenda, saying on Fox Business that it's a bad way to run a country. Now, I'm probably the only one in America who's actually read the decision by the International Trade Court. Most people didn't know we had one, but we do. It's got 9 members. A panel of 3 made a decision. They're appointed for life. It's created by Congress. And their decision was 3-0 that President Trump's tariffs were unconstitutional, a violation effectively of separation of powers. Beautifully written. I mean, I read it and I said, wow, there's good stuff in here. Now, in part, they say, underlying the issues in this case is the notion that, quote, the powers properly belonging to one of the departments, meaning Congress, ought not to be directly and completely administered by either of the departments. Federalist number 48. Wow. You know, I love reading the Federalist Papers right here. I wish more people would, including judges, but there it is. And because of the Constitution's express allocation of the tariff power to Congress, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1, we do not read to delegate an unbounded tariff authority to the president. We instead read that act, those provisions, to impose meaningful limits on any such authority it confers. 2 are relevant here. Stay with me. This is fascinating. Stick with me. Section 1702's delegation of power to regulate importation, read in light of its legislative history and Congress's enactment of more narrow, non-emergency legislation, at the very least, does not authorize the president to impose unbounded tariffs. The worldwide and retaliatory tariffs lack any identifiable limits and thus fall outside the scope of the statute. Second, the law limits authorities may be exercised only to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared. Wow. Very fascinating. Persuasive to many of you? It's persuasive to a lot of conservatives and libertarians for some reason. I'll get to that in a minute. Plaintiffs are correct in the narrow sense that the imprecise term regulate importation under any construction that would comport with the separation of powers underpinnings of the non-delegation and major questions doctrine does not authorize anything as unbounded as the worldwide retaliatory tariffs. Separation of powers, delegation of authority, and so forth. The court said no, can't do that sort of thing. In fact, the court also cited the Constitution. The bottom line is, they said, the Constitution assigns Congress the exclusive powers to, quote, lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, it's out of the Constitution, to regulate commerce with foreign nations. The question in the 2 cases before this court is whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, that emergency act, delegates these powers to the president in the form of authority to impose unlimited tariffs on goods from nearly every country. And they said, no, we don't read it that way. Therefore, president loses, the petitioners win, and the tariffs are unconstitutional and out. Wow. Now, that statute we're talking about, or they are, and that the administration has used with respect to emergency powers, also passed by Congress in 1977, 50 U.S. Code Section 1701. Stick with me. You're going to know more than anybody else. Stay with me. Congress passed this. Any authority granted to the President by Section 1702 of this title may be exercised to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat, which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States, trade, commerce, to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States if the President declares a national emergency with respect to such threat. That's what he's done. In some cases, it involves economic issues, fentanyl, immigration, and so forth. The President is using tariffs regarding policy across the board. B, the authorities granted to the President by Section 1702 of this title may only be exercised to deal with an unusual and extraordinary threat with respect to which a national emergency has been declared. For purposes of this chapter, it's declared by the President, and may not be exercised for any other purpose. And it goes on. Well, it seems to me that the President has the authority he's exercising. Maybe he's pushing the edge of the envelope. But so what? So in steps an appellate court, almost immediately after it, and they issue an order that says the motions to consolidate are granted, that is, the request by the administration, all these petitioners consolidate their case. The appeals are consolidated such that only one set of briefs shall be filed. Number two, the request for an immediate administrative stay by the government, by the President, is granted to the extent that the judgments and the permanent injunctions entered by the Court of International Trade, that lower court, in these cases are temporarily stayed until further notice while this court considers the motions, papers, and so forth. So that's where we are as of today. You're saying, Mark, please get on to Joe Biden. We want to know more about Joe Biden and Jill. I'll leave that to somebody else. Now let's get down to brass tacks here, because this affects your lives. And I'm tired of media reports like this. I'm tired of analysts. I'm tired of all these people talking about things on a surface level. Let's get to the nub of this matter. What is this case about? At its core, it's about separation of powers. The judiciary, the Congress, the executive branch, that is the President. That is, which branch of government makes decisions about tariffs, or at least tariffs of the kind that President Trump has instituted? Who makes that decision? Even this trade court says, essentially, this is a separation of powers case. So we all acknowledge that. But there's a couple of very serious flaws here from the get-go. Have you caught them? Have you noticed something missing in this case? Congress is not one of the parties suing the executive branch. Did you notice that, Mr. Producer? These are private parties. Wait a minute, separation of powers. The allegation is that the President is stealing authority from Congress, or that Congress has delegated the President too much authority. But Congress hasn't done anything. Rand Paul's arguments, they may be interesting, may be persuasive to people, they're dead. He can't get enough senators in a public telephone booth, those of us who remember public telephone booths, to support his position. You know how many House members want to take action against the President? 0. We're talking about the powers of Congress, the trade powers of Congress. This court said they're plenary. They got all this power. It comes from Congress. The petitioners, the litigants have said, this is Congress's power. The commentators, the legal analysts, the law professors, the former federal prosecutors, this is Congress's power, and the President is stepping all over it. But Congress hasn't said that. Congress has not said that. Congress hasn't lifted a finger to do anything about this. Well, Mark, the Republicans control Congress. It doesn't matter. So what if the Democrats control Congress? That makes it more legitimate. We're talking about the structure of the Constitution. Who gets to decide? The President looks at this. He looks at the Constitution. He looks at the 1977 emergency application of a government, federal, congressional statute. He says, I believe my actions comply in the 4 corners of that statute. Congress sits there and they watch. So they must either agree or at least acquiesce to it. And then we have some private petitioners that come along. Oh, let's go to the International Court of Trade. And they say, excuse me, you're violating Congress's power. Congress doesn't say it, but the court says it. If Congress was so concerned that its powers were being abridged, wouldn't Congress have brought a case against the executive branch? I mean, they've done it before. So they're not one of the parties. And more to the point, Congress has the power to pass laws. In fact, it passed the law that the president is using. The Constitution gives Congress broad powers to pass laws, to lay and collect taxes and duties and imposts and excises, and they passed this 1977 law. Now, if this is a separation of powers dispute or a delegation of powers dispute, why hasn't Congress passed legislation to claw back its powers? In fact, why hasn't it even voted on legislation to claw back these powers? Maybe Congress agrees with the president's exercise of power under the 1977 Act. Whether the court agrees or not, or whether the private litigants agree with not, obviously Congress has no beef. It doesn't say only Democrat-controlled Congresses get to speak or not. So where does this leave us? Under our Constitution, as originally adopted and ratified, this is important, as originally adopted and ratified, the judiciary, which was the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was it, giving power to Congress to create these courts, including this trade court, has absolutely no authority to involve itself in this decision. The trade court says this is a dispute involving congressional versus presidential powers, but there literally is no dispute. The president has interpreted the 1977 congressional statute as authorizing the executive branch to issue the kinds of tariffs he has issued. Congress has not in any way challenged this interpretation. Does Congress have the power to delegate that kind of authority? What kind of authority? Congress doesn't think it's violated separation of powers by conferring its own authority to the president. It hasn't even said so. But the three-judge panel has said so. You have certain private litigants who sued in the trade court, claim the president is acting without authority, that he has seized the power that belongs to Congress, or Congress has conferred power it can't confer on the president. And so the trade court decides, we're going to step in. We're going to step in. We're going to rule the president's tariffs unconstitutional. His interpretation of the 1977 Act is unconstitutional. We're going to kill all the tariffs. So that's what they did. 3 judges. The real question then is, where did the trade court get the power to do this? Well, the court has to get a power from somewhere, doesn't it? The court's always looking for power. Who got this power? Who got that power? Where do you get the authority to do this? They write very impressive opinions like this one. This one I just threw on the ground. Very, very impressive opinion about who gets power and where they get power from. Well, it's very impressive. So where did they get their power from? The trade court was created by Congress, the same Congress that has chosen not to act in this case. So where does this judicial review come from? It didn't come from the Constitution. It's not in the Constitution. Look all you want. There's no judicial review language, no such clause in the Constitution. We've touched on this before. We have Marbury versus Madison, in which Chief Justice Marshall, who was a partisan Federalist, he and Jefferson hated each other. He seized the power to have a final decision on constitutional issues to the courts. Jefferson was furious. In fact, all the Democrat Republicans, aka Republicans at the time, were appalled at what had taken place. They just saw their constitutional power completely reversed. So here the trade court should have said to the petitioners, you're in the wrong place. If you want to challenge the tariffs on separation of powers grounds, you need to go to Congress. This isn't a contract dispute. We can handle federal contract disputes, something like this is a fundamental question of congressional power. You're in the wrong place. You can try and persuade a majority of the members of Congress to pass a law, but you can't stand in the shoes of Congress. You private litigants, you can't stand in the shoes of Congress to defend Congress if Congress doesn't want to defend Congress, or if Congress doesn't think it needs to defend Congress, or if Congress doesn't think that there's a separation of powers violation. We, the trade court, we decide issues related to trade, not separation of powers issues that Congress is more than capable of addressing if it so chooses. Neither you, private litigants, nor we, the trade court, should second-guess Congress and step in and say, we have the final say. Why? Because we say we do. Because Justice Marshall did. Because Chief Justice Roberts said. Because Justice Barrett said. Just the other week. You don't think the order of the court is a final decision? Neither did the framers. This is how your Constitution's authors believe the government they established should function. It is beyond debate. Chief Justice Roberts said the Supreme Court has the final say. Barrett says the Supreme Court has the final say. Isn't that precious? The court's saying they have all the power they want. But the Constitution is much more complicated than that. The problem is, as I discussed on radio last week, our law schools, law firms, prosecutors, judges, of course, they all teach the same thing. They all learn the same thing. For them, the Constitution didn't start with the adoption and ratification of the Constitution. The Constitution started when the courts started to seize power, and therefore the courts have the final say. But that's not what the Constitution says. This has become the common thinking, acceptable to believe that judicial supremacy is not only compelled by the Constitution, but it's righteous. It saves the republic. Now, how does it save the republic? You can have tyranny in any branch of government. Judicial tyranny is not of what a republic is made. And that's what we have right now. The president's tariffs can be reversed by Congress. The president's tariffs can be ended by we the people in the next election if we elect somebody who runs against tariffs. There's checks on the president by our representatives and by the people. There are no checks on the federal courts, none whatsoever, zero. There used to be, but they've seized all this power. The fact that the people voted for this president and his policies and the Congress that's in place now, the Congress that's chosen not to challenge the tariffs and the president who's chosen to put the tariffs in place, how is it that what we've done and what he's done is unconstitutional, but what this court has done is not unconstitutional? There's no effective checks by we the people on a rogue judiciary that substitutes its political, personal policy preferences for the public. And that's the problem. These judges serve for life. They are not subject to the consent of the governed, and their powers are important but focused and limited. They are supposed to stay in their lane, but they refuse. The irony is, in this case, and the hundreds of others that have been filed, that it's the courts that are acting unconstitutionally, when they, in the first place, are exceeding any and every notion of what the framers had in mind when they created what was supposed to be a fairly tepid judiciary in the first place. Too bad this isn't taught in law schools or practiced by lawyers and judges, because this is clearly a dangerous time. I don't care if you like tariffs or not. I know you love the Constitution. Wouldn't it be nice if some of the judges, some of the law firms, some of the law schools actually taught it? I'll be right back.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.